All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice exam series. We're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. After being told he cannot have his Kit Kat bar until he finishes his broccoli, Eli quickly eats his entire plate of broccoli and all his other vegetables. What factor is influencing Eli's behavior in this scenario? So we are looking at Eli's behavior. It's always important to understand who we are concerned with, who is the question asking about. And if we're looking at Eli's behavior, what do we know so far? We know Eli cannot have his Kit Kat bar until he eats his broccoli. When he is told that, he eats all of his broccoli and all of his vegetables. So what's changed? Well, his behavior has changed once he was told you can't have your Kit Kat bar until you finish his broccoli. So Eli was told you can't have your Kit Kat bar until you eat your broccoli. Whatever Eli do, Eli ate all the broccoli and his vegetables, and the consequence is we're thinking he gets the Kit Kat. So what influenced Eli's behavior? A motivating operation. Not until Eli was told that he could have his Kit Kat bar did he eat his broccoli, or did he quickly eat his broccoli. So the value of eating broccoli went up, right? Because the value of eating broccoli went up because of the consequence of receiving the Kit Kat. So it was more valuable to engage in the behavior of eating the broccoli once he was told he would get the Kit Kat bar. So it was a temporary evocative effect thanks to the motivating operation. What about stimulus control? Since Eli's behavior changed in the presence of the contingency, the antecedent of you can't have your Kit Kat bar until you eat his broccoli, his behavior is under the control of that contingency. So really, Eli's behavior is controlled by both a motivating operation and a stimulus control. A rock climber learns how to properly secure harnesses and tie safety knots by carefully reading a guidebook and following the written instructions step by step. After practicing these techniques in actual climbing settings, the climber starts adapting their techniques based on feedback from the environment. What type of behavior is represented by following the instructions from the guidebook? Again, behavior question. What behavior are we looking at? We're looking at following instructions from guidebook, because we know that this rock climber learned to secure harnesses and safety knots by reading the guidebook. He wasn't in the actual environment, but once he did practice techniques in the actual environment, then he started changing his techniques based on feedback from the environment. We are worried about or concerned with the behavior of following the instructions. Is that rule governed, contingency shaped, generalized, or maintenance? Well, it's not going to be generalization, right? Because he was reading the book and following instructions step by step initially. And he wasn't going into these climbing settings until much later. Following the instructions was not yet generalized. Maintenance is when he stopped learning and could continue to do the harnesses and safety knots. That, again, came after the instructions from the guidebook. We're just focused on following instructions from the guidebook. And following instructions is most related to rule-governed behavior. Because when you're following instructions, these are verbal statements of a contingency of what you should do. Once he went into the climbing setting and his techniques were changing based on the environment, then his behavior was actually shaped by the contingencies. His behavior of following instructions from the guidebook was rule-governed. A zookeeper is investigating the cause of a giraffe's repetitive head-swaying behavior. She systematically alters different environmental variables, such as attention from visitors and access to food, to see which condition increases or decreases the behavior. What type of assessment is being conducted? We have an assessment question. And what are we trying to figure out? Assessments, we're always trying to determine something. Maybe a preference, maybe a function. In this case, the zookeeper wants to know the cause of a giraffe's head swaying behavior. So this might be experimental analysis of behavior. She is systematically altering variables such as attention and access to food. What does that sound like to you? If we have these conditions where we are altering functions, right? Altering consequences of attention and tangibles and escape. To me, it sounds like a functional analysis. So if we look at a descriptive analysis, with a descriptive analysis, we're figuring out what's occurring, right? We're looking at antecedents, behaviors, consequences, and we're just describing what is happening. The zookeeper is actually manipulating conditions in the environment. B, a preference assessment. This is not a preference assessment because the zookeeper is going through the different function conditions. And when we are looking at behavior through the function condition lens, right, attention, tangible, escape, we are trying to do a functional analysis. We're trying to figure out what is the function of this repetitive head swaying behavior. A good example of experimental analysis of behavior. And then a comparative analysis has to do with comparing interventions, which the zookeeper is not doing. During an assessment, a behavior analyst is observing a child who consistently says juice throughout the day, regardless of whether they appear to be thirsty or not. Sometimes the child says juice when they see the juice bottle, and other times when the juice is completely out of sight. To determine if this verbal behavior is functioning as a true man, what should the behavior analyst consider? Verbal operant question. For verbal operants, you need to know a few things. What evokes the verbal behavior, which is probably the most important. Is there point-to-point correspondence? Is there formal similarity? And what is reinforcing that behavior? With a true mand, what is going to evoke a mand? Well, motivating operations, right? MOs evoke mands. And so if the analyst wants to determine if juice is a mand, they need to determine, is juice being evoked by a motivating operation or something else? Let's look at A. If the child also says juice in response to being asked, what do you like to drink? Well, A would be an intraverbal, not a mand. B, whether the child can tell you the color and type of juice available to them. This would be much more of a tact or an intraverbal if they were asked the question. C, if the child still engages in the behavior if someone else is in the room. This is looking at a automatic function potentially. It's not necessarily looking at if there's an MO present, because the child could engage in a tact, let's say, if no one else was in the room. So that leaves us with D, whether the verbal behavior is evoked by a state of deprivation for juice. Yes, deprivation is related to the MOs. We're trying to figure out if this man is related to MOs. If juice is evoked due to deprivation, there's a good chance juice is functioning as a true mand. Wesley is taught to say, can I pet him in the presence of an unfamiliar dog in public if Wesley would like to pet the dog? Yesterday, Wesley saw a picture of a dog in a book in his room and said, can I pet him without any additional teaching? What does this represent? All right, so we're looking at Wesley's behavior. What do we know about Wesley's behavior? We know he was taught to say, can I pet him in the presence of a dog? Then Wesley saw a picture of a dog in a book and said, can I pet him? So clearly he's made some sort of connection and he started to generalize this behavior. So how can we describe that? A, observational learning. Well, Wesley was taught this, so it wasn't necessarily observation. Same with imitation, right? Wesley was taught to say, can I pet him in the presence of an unfamiliar dog? With imitation, we're looking at a model, and Wesley would be imitating right away. With observational learning, Wesley would have watched somebody do something and done the same thing. Wesley was explicitly taught this particular skill and now is generalizing it. So the best answer is going to be emergent relations, because not only is he doing what he was taught, he's now creating new connections with the picture of the dog in his room. It's very similar to stimulus equivalence, right? You're doing reflexivity and symmetry and transitivity and forming these concepts and connections. And then multiple exemplars. Multiple exemplars is a generalization strategy. We're not looking at the strategy here. We're looking at Wesley's behavior, and it represents emergent relations. A freshman in a college French class is nervous as his professor goes around the room and says French phrases. When he gets to the freshman, he says, bonjour. Which of the following examples would represent an echoic from the freshman? Like we just talked about, verbal behavior. What do we need to know? What's evoking it? Point to point, formal similarity, what's reinforcing it? Let's start with what is evoking this behavior. We have a situation where the French class or the freshman is in a French class and the professor is going around saying French phrases. Gets to the freshman, says bonjour. So it's evoked by a verbal statement. Now, how do we get from that to picking an echoic? Well, with an echoic, it's very similar to an interverbal, because an interverbal is also evoked by a verbal SD. The difference is an echoic is going to have point-to-point correspondence, whereas the interverbal will not. Let's look at A. If the freshman responds with hello, this would be an interverbal. Yes, it's evoked by a verbal SD, but there's no point-to-point correspondence. B, if the freshman responds with, that means hello in English. That is also an example of an interverbal. What we're looking for is C. The freshman responds with bonjour. It's evoked by the verbal SD. It's got point to point. It's exactly what was said. It was copied. And then D, if the freshman asks the professor to repeat themselves, that would be a mand, because the freshman will be manding for information. If the freshman copies bonjour with bonjour, that would be an echoic. We've got a verbal behavior evoked by a verbal SD with point-to-point correspondence. Everyone in the office has to go to work on Saturday to finish up some paperwork for the quarter. The boss says that you only have to stick around until your work is done. What contingency does this resemble? So we've got a contingency that involves a group, right? Everyone in the office. So this office team goes to work on Saturday. You got to finish up paperwork. The contingency is once your work is done, you can leave. Now, what are our group contingencies? We have independent, where everyone looks out for themselves. We have dependent, where the whole group is dependent on one person or a small sample. This is the hero procedure. We have interdependent, where everyone in the group is responsible for everyone else. And then, of course, the hero, which is also the dependent. If you've got a situation where everyone is responsible for themselves, so once your work is done, you can leave. What is that going to be? Well, that's going to be an independent group contingency. Two employees who work at Macy's are primarily in charge of checking and restocking inventory or helping customers find certain items. Typically, the employees spend about double the amount of time helping customers compared to restocking inventory. How might matching law explain this? Now, what does matching law say? Matching law says if I have a behavior and I've got opportunities for reinforcement, my behavior is going to go to where reinforcement is. Now, if this reinforcement is delivered twice as much as this reinforcement, my behavior is likely to happen twice as much here. So if we have a situation where you have employees who need to check and restock inventory or help customers, and they are spending double the amount of time helping customers compared to restocking inventory, why might that be? A, the act of helping customers is reinforced more proportionately to restocking inventory. It's possible, right? If they're getting more reinforcement for helping customers proportionate to restocking inventory, matching law would say this is how behavior should be. What about B? There's a lower response effort associated with helping customers. Matching law is not really describing response effort. We're worried about how much reinforcement is being given typically. And all we know is they're spending double the amount of time helping customers. C, it is due to random chance that employees help customers more. Well, we're not going to do anything or chalk anything up to random chance because we are deterministic. D, there are more opportunities to help customers. Therefore, that behavior occurs at a higher rate. We don't know that for sure. All we know is they help double the amount of customers as restocking inventory. It's likely that helping customers is reinforced proportionately to restocking inventory as far as matching law is concerned. Kenny used to flinch every time the family dog barked because the barking previously occurred as the dog jumped on the child. However, after many instances where the dog barked without jumping, the child no longer flinches at the sound of barking. What process is responsible for the change in the child's response? Now, we're looking at the child's response, or in this case, it's going to be a reflex, right? because the child is flinching. Kenny flinches every time the dog barks because barking was paired with dog jumping. And that's the key. Previously, as the dog barked, the dog would jump on the child. However, after many instances where the dog barked without jumping, the child no longer flinches at the sound of barking. So it was paired, and then the dog started barking without jumping. It became unpaired. Flinching no longer occurs. So when we have a situation where a conditioned reflex no longer happens, what do we call that? A, operant extinction. Well, we're not looking at operant behavior here, right? It's not consequence driven. It's just a stimulus reflex relationship. Dog barks, we flinch. B, punishment. Again, we're not being punished here. Dog barking and jumping has been unpaired. A situation of respondent extinction has occurred. And then D, habituation. If there was no pairing, then habituation might have been the case. If we were just talking about the jumping repeated over and over again, maybe habituation. But since there was an unpairing of stimuli, respondent extinction is a much better example. A researcher asks their graduate assistant to write an operational definition for engaging peers. Which of the following answer choices meets the researcher's request best? All right, easy operational definition question. Operational definitions, we're going to be clear, concise, complete. As much information as quickly as possible, where whoever reads that definition knows exactly what we're looking for. So if we need an operational definition for engaging peers, what might that look like? A, engaging peers occurs when the participant makes any verbal statement that a peer responds to. Can we observe that? Absolutely. We have a situation, we can look at the verbal statement and we can see if a peer responds to that statement. Could this definition be better? 100%, but it isn't bad. B, engaging peers is defined as not avoiding eye contact with peers during group activities. This not avoiding eye contact is not a great example, because what does that look like? Not avoiding eye contact. We want actionable definitions. C, engaging peers occurs when the participant shows interest by listening to their peers. How do we define showing interest? What does it mean to listen? This is not as descriptive as A. D, engaging peers is defined by friendliness and respect towards others. That is extremely subjective. That is not going to be a good operational definition. What we want to choose is A, engaging peers occurs when the participant makes any verbal statement that a peer responds to. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Check out Behavior Analyst Study. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.